Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host of Talking with Fans People. And I get frustrated by what I would deem wicked forms of argumentation, namely uh, bullshit. Basically, I get provoked by bullshit. There's no point in denying it. I'm subject to provocation like anybody else, but I like to try to understand that these sort of things, these kind of issues, they manifest in various forms. So Rachel Stalker actually replied after quite a while, after the first video. I anticipated that there wasn't going to be any further dealings with this individual. And he sent an email which basically reiterated his hate towards Rachel, his weird obsession with her. Even if Rachel wronged him at some point in the past, and maybe she did by leading him on or something, they never had any kind of sexual relationship or anything. The amount of attention and energy he's putting in towards uh, this woman he's never been in the same room with, is that correct? He's never even actually been in the same room with, indicate all the indication we need that he is obsessed with something from his past that he really needs to get over, because it was years ago that they were friends, and then he felt like she sort of unfairly friend zoned him or something, and various other stuff. And she concedes that, she kind of did, and that she feels bad about it and apologized at the time. And he just doesn't feel as though, I guess, she's been sufficiently accountable. Of course, I don't think that he watched the previous video that we made. He just avoided it and just sort of worked around its existence without addressing anything that was said in it. They were like internet friends,
Yeah. He was the first person to read my birth chart before I knew what birth charts were. And it was like a pen pal friendship. Like, I wouldn't call myself leading it on. He did, sometimes, would write, romantic things, but I would just, skim through it and be like, I wouldn't even read it sometimes. They were so elaborate and long.
So this is the thing that offended me most of all about this exchange was his attempt to say, look, I know what's going to happen now. You're going to make a video, and that's because I'm so able to manipulate you. Okay, I want to make a clear distinction between provocation and manipulation. There's good reason for me to make this video on multiple levels. It kills a lot of birds with one stone. In other words, it's worth addressing this kind of bullshit fake double bind. That guy's not putting me in any double bind. Successfully, correctly predicting that I'm going to not put up with this and make it public is not a sign that he's successfully manipulated me, but that once again he's crossed the line and needs to check himself, He needs to be called to account. It's also a specific enough kind of bad behavior that it works well for me to say, okay, look, here's a chance to a teachable moment, so to speak, or a live streamable moment about a topic that seems interesting and what can go awry when people, I guess, don't have a chick, When dudes don't get a chick, dudes can go crazy. That's what I should really title this is, when dudes go crazy because they don't get a chick, because they can't get chicks. When dudes go crazy because they can't get chicks is what this video should be titled.
Yeah, because at one point I got scared because he was saying that we were soulmates and whatever, and I was not physically attracted to him at all, and I had to be basically I was I don't even know if I believe in that stuff. I'm sorry, I don't think that's you. I actually was honest with him every single time.
Well, look, Grass Eater, I do respect the fact that That for dudes who find themselves, quote unquote, not reproductively viable for whatever reason, whoever you want to blame for the circumstance, for extended periods of time, it's easy for them to get bitter and resentful and sort of blame the way the world is for being stacked against them and their qualities, and that you know people don't value what they bring to the table as a hump worthy trait or something, so I get that it can, and it's self-reinforcing a lot of times. Like, the longer it goes on, the more evidence you have on a particularist level that in fact you lack reproductive viability, and you return to times when you thought briefly you had it and it didn't work out, and you think that's what went wrong, is that's where everything went wrong, when Rachel turned me down or something. But and this guy's like fake ass enigmatic philosopher shit is the other thing that just rubs me the wrong way completely. Like, he's trying to be all spiritual and karmic minded and using all this mystical language to try to suggest that Rachel's subject to some kind of mystical curses or whatnot.
He responded.
What did he say?
You said I was too cowardly to watch the video. Me not having watched the video and me being too cowardly to have done so are two different things. You sound like a psychopath, by the way, because you are very, very nearly are. The ex
Reply right now by saying, so, you're too much of a coward to know what I sound like. You didn't watch the video, coward. You have nothing to say about what I sounded like because you were too much of a coward to watch it. Tell him we're live streaming right now. He's welcome to come listen.
Okay, what do I say?
Put him a link.
A link?
Yeah, just grab a link.
Okay.
Say, come talk about it right now, coward.
Okay.
Fucking piece of shit. I mean, seriously. No Legends Fall. I don't like maybe just stop replying. Okay? I'm not somebody who says, oh, this is a good idea. Let's avoid the problem rather than stomp the cockroach into the ground. It's like we're dealing with somebody here who clearly badly needs to be checked and put in his place. And he's messing with my girlfriend, right? So am I unhappy about it? Yeah, absolutely.
And this has been going on for years, for 9 years.
9 years. Did you send him a link?
Never met each other. What?
Did you send him a link?
Yeah, I sent him a link.
Did you say we're live streaming right now? Say that, because you're going to think it's the same video.
Oh.
I can't believe he admits to not watching it, but says, well, it wasn't out of cowardice. My ass wasn't out of cowardice, coward.
Seriously.
So this guy's been stalking Rachel for 9 years, and he doesn't want to actually deal with anything.
He doesn't even know me.
What's his name?
He knows me through my birth chart, and that because he knows my birth chart, he knows all about me. I'm like, look, dude, like, you don't know me. Like, you don't know me like that. Just because you a birth chart, like, no, that does not mean that you. No, I'm sorry. You don't know more than me.
What's his name?
Thomas Saldek.
Thomas Saldek. Sladek or whatever.
Oh, yeah, it's Sladek.
Sladek. So, Thomas Sladek, hopefully you have joined this live stream and are here and are listening to my legit disgust and dismissal of any sort of legitimacy from anything you're saying. You have no legitimacy at all. Audra in the media, you are anon. You don't know if I'm a rapist. You don't know me. Well, I mean, so what does that have to do with anything? You're not going to rape me. You're somewhere on the internet. I'm here.
What?
Okay, well, you be legend, okay? Fine, you be legend. Are you Patrick? Whatever his name is? Sledek?
Thomas.
Thomas Sledek?
Yeah, maybe.
It might be Audrina Media. Audrina Media has yet to make sense, as far as I can tell, in any meaningful sense. But it doesn't sound like the same kind of writing as Thomas?
Yeah, Thomas.
Sledek? Yeah. So, and the thing is, I am quite confident that Rachel is not alone in this sort of phenomenon. That girls all over the world probably have to deal with this. That anytime they try to get sort of friendly in a casual way with a dude who's single anyway, that there's a lot of yeah. Out the media, what are you doing? What is your point? Can you actually speak words that make sense to me? Are you threatening me? If so, what is the threat you're making? Can you be explicit about it, please? Instead of cowardly. Audrina Media. So, this Audrina Media person's been around for a while and has not ever been, I would say, a meaningful contributor to the discourse. It's called one-itis. What's one-itis? The thing is, what I really dislike is the vagueness. It's like if you're gonna threaten me, threaten me. Tell me what your threat is.
He's like setting back karma on me. He's like, I don't know why people do that. Like, I don't like that.
Who is?
He said he was like, you're gonna get like.
He's got no power.
Karma coming for you.
He's got no power. This is overpowering every attempt he's making. Have him say, then join the.
Yeah.
You can send him. He can speak to me face to face in the autonomy room as well. Tell him to grow a pair and meet me in the Whereby Autonomy room.
Okay.
I am waiting there for him.
Well, can I get a link?
Yeah.
Send it to my.
I'll email it to you. So, as soon as one starts making waves in general, titular, ain't I? You mean of a title? No, I know. I'm not saying that most single guys are like this at all. I'm not saying that. I'm saying this particular instance of somebody who has become toxic about their reproductive status. And I think that's the only thing I'm trying to say. People become toxic about lots of stuff. Some people become toxic about race. Some people become toxic about politics. Some people become toxic about feminism. Some people become toxic about religion or whatever. This guy's toxic about his reproductive status. If he had a girlfriend, he wouldn't be doing this, right? He wouldn't be directing all his attention to Rachel. And if he had any reason to think that what he was doing was a good idea, then he wouldn't. He
calls you a sociopath.
Well, tell him to come talk to me. Tell me to my face. Tell him to grow a pair and tell me to my face. I'm waiting to talk to him. This is the thing. You shine the light of day on people who are really shady and up to no good. They do not want to have that light shine on them. They absolutely do not. I'm willing to accept whatever critique he's got. If he wants to say I'm a sociopath, tell him I need to be critiqued on it. I'm willing and able to hear his critique. I want to hear it. I want to hear his critique of my behavior and which of my behaviors or indications are expressing to him that I'm a sociopath. I'm willing to hear it. I can listen. Unless he's just talking completely out of his ass.
Which is probably the case. He's never had to deal with this before either. This is new. Someone who actually like loves me and who like actually stand up to his bull crap.
You like Trotsky much? Do you follow the law? Return the slab? So are you making threats or what? Are you saying you're going to stab me with an ice pick? Opera immediate, will you be a man and say what you mean? Be a human, be an adult human being and say what you mean. Be an adult. Take ownership of what you're saying and actually mean specific things. Can you do that for me, please? Why don't they want the light shown on them? Is it possible they thrive on attention more than they receive guilt? I mean, the thing is, not with me, you know. Okay, so Grass Eater says, would it frustrate you further if he decided to door slam you? That bugs me. That bugged me. Well, I mean, the thing is, in this circumstance, he's put in a clear situation. He's either has to step up and have a conversation with me and explain to me why I'm a sociopath and stuff and prove that he's not just a cowardly liar, or he goes away. You know, if he continues to harass Rachel, then I'd say we'd block him. You know, and probably it'll come up periodically again as an example of somebody who represents one clear form of toxicity in the world that needs to be crushed by the light of day. Listen, Matt Evans, it's not like I've been giving this guy a lot of attention. He sent Rachel this extensive, long, hateful email. We made a video about it, and that was the last we heard of him for quite some time.
Yeah, I actually put his email in spam on purpose because, like, it was harassment. He started harassing me. So I put his stuff in spam. And even when I had no clue at all that he was, like, emailing me, he continued to email me.
And the thing is, I get what you're saying. There are circumstances where people most need to be ignored, and those are circumstances where they're most looking to see provocation. This person is making broader claims than that and trying to attain more concrete outcomes than that. He's a force of evil, you might say. Hi, Dad.
Hello.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm talking on here at the moment. I just finished working for you. Thank you. There's enough here for all three of us. You want to share steaks with us tonight? So there's enough here for all three of us, no? Okay. All right, thanks, Dad. I'll make them later. So, you know, it boils down to this. It's important to call bluffs, I think. if in fact I don't want to sue him, you know, I want to confront him. I want him to have to defend his own bad behavior. You know, this is the thing. When you deal with people like this who are accountability avoidance syndrome people who are basically narcissists or have some sort of dark triad kind of qualities, what's the number one thing they can't stand? Direct, open, light of day, you know? Yeah, that always works, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that makes me freer than most people is that I don't have secrets and I'm not trying to do shady stuff. And there's not a bunch of stuff that I want to keep unrevealed that people can threaten me to reveal, you know? So as a consequence, it makes me less susceptible to the kind of leverage that these kind of people are.
Rams 49ers.
Rams 49ers?
Yeah, 5:30.
Cool. These kind of people normally try to work with. Diamond says, Rachel, stay safe online and offline. Never share locations on social media if you have any. You know, I don't live like that, Diamond. And Rachel and I are together. Rachel and I are a pair. Rachel doesn't post shit like that online necessarily. But, you know, it's like,
I probably will block them after, like.
But this is the thing. This is the difference between me and everybody else in the world, right? Oh, there's this awful stalker person. I want to talk to him face to face right now.
Yeah, like, and I wish he would, so he could actually like get this stuff over with. It's been like 10 years. Like, get over it.
I hate avoidance. Grass eater and I are on the same page here. I hate avoidance.
He's avoiding it.
Of course he is, because he's in the wrong. If he were in the right, he wouldn't be avoiding dealing with me.
So here's the whole story. In 2011, I wanted to know more about astrology, and I met Thomas because he studies astrology. So he's like, you don't act this way because in your birth chart, your sun is this, your moon is this, and your ascendant is this. And I was like, oh, this is new to me. So he started teaching me, and that was fun. Then he started sending me personal emails out of nowhere, like we were like friends, and I would skim them, and I would like shortly back him, like be like, oh wow, like that's cool, or like I would acknowledge the email. And so like at the time I started off not having a boyfriend, and then I did, and I didn't tell him, and he got really pissed about that. And I was like, told him that I was sorry. Like years later, I was like, I'm really sorry. Like I didn't mean to lead you on. Like I apologize for what I did, because I did feel really bad about it. And then like he just like couldn't get over it. He just like I don't know. He just couldn't get over it.
Okay. So, Dolan Narkovsky. What is this? Hi, I'm new. Never seen your channel before. This is a channel about mostly personality type, psychology, philosophy, politics, sort of abstraction kind of talk. Often popular with intuitives and those who prefer conversation about abstractions over conversations about more concrete matters. And right at the moment, we are discussing this individual who has emailed my girlfriend Rachel on that. This is the second occasion after the first occasion after being checked before. So in other words, it's been basically stalking her in a sense. And I made a video before that said basically don't do that, I guess. And he never watched it, but he replied, he started emailing again. And so Diamond asked, well, what if the guy's a nutcase? Well, then I'll make that determination if he talks to me. I'll be able to tell by talking to him how much of a nutcase, what kind of a nutcase, and whether or not he's actually a threat. And the thing is, Rachel apologized more than the individual is due, frankly, because she didn't really do anything wrong except violate some social norms that aren't legitimate TI expectations by the other person. So whatever about that. Am I an academic or a philosopher of some sort? I'm a professional competition flow debate coach. So what that means is the answer is sort of, I guess you could say. Yeah, kind of. That'd be the best way to answer that. It would be disingenuous to say, no, I'm not an academic or philosopher of some sort, but it would also be disingenuous to say that I'm an academic. I'm not really. I work in private enterprise as a private coach. So, and I also do coach and teach other things. I was teaching conditional logic to my ISTP kid earlier because I have a former conditional teacher of conditional logic classes, and critical thinking classes and stuff like that.
Oops.
Do you do that on purpose?
No.
Alternate media, it was actually not on purpose, but I'm fine with it because you've been just sort of towing the line the whole time.
That was an accident, though. It was a slip of the finger, I promise you. But fate has it that it's okay.
So the thing is, I would tend to agree with that, Grass Eater. It is possible that if I were to actually speak to the guy, that there could be some sort of resolution. Because I'm not necessarily looking to annihilate the guy. I would prefer a solution where he actually learns something. How do I teach conditional logic? Well, I could share with you this here. So this is where Chloe and I are currently working in terms of the conditional logic stuff. And I am still waiting in the autonomy room if homie wants to show up at any point. You can meet with me face to face.
Yeah.
One-on-one.
I also want to say that he called me his soulmate. Like, he was like, based on our charts, like, we're soulmates. And I turned him down. Like, I was like, I'm sorry, but I don't, like, see you that way. Like, I was honest. I really, like, tried my best not to, like, hurt any feelings.
So the question Broccoli Todd asks is, how do you come across this channel without knowing it's mainly a typology channel? Well, the title of this particular live stream is about baiting, and namely provocation versus manipulation. So this guy correctly predicted that I would make a video about that email, but that does not mean that he successfully manipulated me into making a video about that email. I make a video about everything that seems unusual and of interest to me, good or bad. And this certainly stands out as something unusual and of interest. And I also think it generalizes well, because I'm quite confident that Rachel is not the only woman in the world to have somebody who... Trouble, you handsome devil.
Uh-oh, is he trying to come in?
He is right there at the door.
Aww.
Oh, Trouble, you are a handsome devil.
He
He's giving me the squinty eyes.
Oh, is he?
Oh my goodness.
Like, give me some food.
Hold on, let me show you. Oh, Trouble, can you show the people? Can they see you? Let's find out. Oh, you can't quite see. You see his tail.
Yeah.
Trouble, come here. Trouble, come here. Can you scoot the laptop a little bit this way? As much as it goes, huh? Oh, Trouble, I wish we could show the people. Wait, hold on. Maybe if I pull back here. No, you just can't see very much of him. But Trouble, come over here, though, so we can see your beautiful, handsome face. There's his handsome face. See? Oh, you can almost see it. There it is. Oh, there's his handsome face. Oh, Trouble, what a handsome devil. You can almost see him.
Very handsome.
He is. You can see why he, he's like, that's what makes the other male cats feel like inadequate.
Still there?
I'll feed him. Oh, Trouble, hello.
Hi, Trouble.
Oh, yes. Let me take a picture of you. Where's my phone? I'm going to be able to show the people what a handsome devil he is. Oh, yes. Oh, what a handsome devil. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I got a couple pictures of him. Now I will take these pieces of food.
Where'd he go?
It's going to be back a little bit. It goes down to where he knows I put the food.
That's good.
He alerts me to his presence, and then Anyway, okay. So what was I talking about? Something very important. Oh, right, the stalker person. So, my point is, at some point, he's got to decide whether he's going to attain legitimacy on any external grounds or only on his own internal metrics. And if, in fact, he's only going to attain legitimacy on his own internal metrics, then it's going to be decreasingly possible for him to convince anybody else of the legitimacy of those metrics. And ergo, my publicizing this is the best thing to do. I do have plenty of opinions about politics and philosophies. What would you like my opinion about, Dolan Narkovsky? I'd be happy to articulate an opinion about any political or philosophical matter you'd like. I don't understand what good takes and bad takes are, exactly. I mean, do I do sometimes a good job of explaining some things and sometimes a bad job? I guess sometimes I'm more on than others. I don't know if I'd call that good takes, bad takes, but I think you must mean something different than what I interpret there.
So far, no response.
As a general matter, well, Green of Vegas, I don't want him to feel comfortable in the status quo. I want him to realize that he's been presented with a specific choice and has landed on side B and no longer has any legitimate ground to stand on. What do I think about the current political situation in America, assuming you are an American? Well, I am running for president in 2024, and my position is that the primary underlying problem with politics in general is a failure to have a metaframe for discourse, which is to say, we need to reach some sort of consensus about what comprises civil discourse about public policy before we can make any determinations really about what the proper policy is. That in general, we need to move away from agenda-based policy decisions and towards policy tailored towards specific considerations. That we should have a smaller scope of efficacy towards our policy making determinations. So running for president, how you only have 6,000 subs and a few viewers. So Dolan Narkovsky, what you're doing there is you are saying, how can you run for president when you are at the moment lacking on vector S, right? Namely, visibility, notoriety, large scale name recognition. Now that's something that I will have to attain, but like I said, I'm running for president in 2024, not 2020. And there's a process of garnering increasing grassroots support and eventually growing my level of visibility. So obviously, if I were saying I'm going to run for president because I'm so visible right now and I have a good chance to win on that ground, then I'd be insane. I'm running for president because I actually believe myself to be the most qualified candidate in the country. And the reason for that is I have a whole lifetime's worth of professional experience coaching policy debate, namely dealing with public policy as an object of analysis, And additionally, I have sufficient understanding of the human condition and human psyche to understand the complicated metric of incorporating multiple criteria that people use for evaluating things in ways that can help all parties to feel included, have things be less zero sum and more positive sum, etc. But the other thing is, as far as a specific approach from the executive branch perspective, the executive branch is not there to make legislation. And people often ask the president about their legislative agenda. But of course, a president is not foremost somebody who expresses a legislative agenda, but rather an executive agenda. And I would see that probably the most positive good done by the president is done in two specific areas. One is in foreign policy and foreign relations, where I believe I have the quality of a statesman that has been lacking from the citizen democracy for far too long. And in the second, that I have an understanding of how to use the Justice Department to impact case law, which will more meaningfully impact the way that federal law plays out in the country than any sort of legislative action in the first place would. So I just believe myself vastly more informed about politics, policy, and the role of government, and vastly less dogmatic than any other candidate I've ever encountered. I have specifically a position on what it means to be dogmatic versus principled versus utilitarian, and how a president needs to be ultimately pragmatic, which means not constrained by any specific agenda or dogma. It's the nature of the job and the nature of the nation state as a combination collective moral agent / representation of the interests of the population. It sort of defies easy conclusions via Rice calculi, and certainly it's ill-suited to simple utilitarian calculi. I think that in the status quo, political decisions are made based on heuristics that don't work, that are heuristics designed for simple systems or closed systems, and that are being applied to unpredictable multivariate systems, and it's not going to work. So well, I am a very long-time policy debate coach, so I understand how to understand public policy and the relationship between the electorate and their elected officials and the roles of various bodies of government and all that kind of stuff very well. I am running for president primarily because I feel obligated to run for president, because I genuinely believe myself to be the only person in the country who's articulating the totality of everything I say in the way that I say, and also has the certainty of self to follow through and do it, the clarity of purpose, and at the same time, the proper amount of ambiguity tolerance. You know, it's like you need a meta-rationalist, and I mean, I only want to serve one term, but I think it's my duty. I mean, broadly, Todd, I would tend to agree with you that circumstantially, Dolan Narkovsky's arrival at this particular moment, when I am undergoing a certain amount of battle from YouTube. For example, I just had a video age restricted because somebody, possibly somebody I recently typed police, for example, went through my old videos trying to find something bad to report me to YouTube. Because, of course, prior to the standards changes, I was more all over the place I was more risque with my humor, more likely to use curse words, etc. Anyway, the years and years of drug use have damaged your mind by now. Here's to you, fucktard. No, this is not really a spite. I mean, well, yes, Is Rachel's Stalker, would Rachel's Stalker qualify as a spite monkey or a hate monkey? Yeah, I would say yes, but they're not.
Not of the same group.
It's an entirely separate species of spite monkey that evolved independently on on some remote island. Who's talking here? DJ Granville? No, am I supposed? Oh, that's the next guy I was going to type, please. I'm waiting to see Octavia Silva. And next time I see Octavia Silva, I'm going to ask them if they're going to do the editing on the other video or not. If they're not, then I'll just do it myself and I'll upload the next type, please video, and then we'll be ready for the next one. I don't want to get ahead. I don't want there to be a line of stuff to have to complete one direction or the other. He says you can't be reasoned with. Well, why doesn't he try to reason with us then? Okay, but Diamond, look, we have two choices in life. We either operate through that frame of reference, in which case anybody who's being inappropriate in their discourse, namely using vague threats and or trying to seem scary, wins. That's not okay. Mm-hmm. There's a teacher in France who got beheaded for showing her class caricatures of Muhammad. That's not okay. The conclusion is not to not show caricatures of Muhammad, but for everybody to show caricatures of Muhammad. To make sure that it's never okay for anybody to think that their version of sacred trumps our free expression in terms of priority. Not acceptable. Because, look, their particular understanding of what comprises sacred should not overweight the negative right of everybody to make their own determinations as to what's sacred. And if I don't think it's sacred, then it doesn't, and I shouldn't adhere to those rules. I mean, that's where you're wrong, Diamond. It's simply, we have two choices. Either my threats of violence are more important than your rights, or your rights are more important than my threats of violence. Those are the only two choices in this instance. And to defer to the violent in that instance is to say your threats of violence matter more than my rights. I am willing to be your slave. The thing is, I'm not libertarian or right-wing. I am somebody who is very, very difficult to box. And the reason is because I am, as I said, an experienced policy debate coach. So I articulate the best policies for every particular circumstance and situation. Now, I do factor in as a general rule, what I would call limiting principles and or system integrity as important, but not exclusively important. For example, I'm in favor of federal environmental regulations, even though one might say that exceeds the constitutional scope of the federal government. So I don't fit into any of the boxes. And what I'm trying to express to everybody about what my policy agenda is agendaless politics. I'm not in favor of conservatism, liberalism, I'm in favor of the correct conclusion about everything, and to try to remove from the evaluation of what is the correct conclusion any kind of partisanship, any kind of agenda-based dogma. So if you're somebody who insists on, no, absolutely not a centrist. I don't believe in splitting the baby when splitting the baby means splitting the baby. Now that's the position we've taken on COVID, essentially, is a centrist position that says, well, let's not really quarantine everybody, but sort of quarantine everybody, divide people into classes of necessary and unnecessary, and do something that's guaranteed to fail, but is guaranteed to fail a little bit less than nothing at all. Well, that's a terrible approach. The correct approach would have been a genuine, complete, absolute lockdown until the virus is eliminated from the population entirely, or acknowledge that the nature of this virus precludes us from meaningfully controlling it with these measures and let it run its course. Those are the two logical choices. I am not an agenda person, so I'm not telling you which is the best choice. I'm telling you what's the wrong choice is this stupid split the baby approach that people took. Because I'm not going to try to say, we have to adhere to this agenda or that agenda. Here's another example, Dolan, on the abortion question. The question is, do we view it as property or human being? If you view it as property, then we necessarily have to understand that women would require the permission of the co-property owner, namely the co-property creator, the male, to get an abortion. So if you are for abortion rights, you are for requiring the permission of the man. And if we view it as a human being, then it wouldn't be susceptible to abortion at all. Nobody's arguing that central point, first and foremost, of let's decide the only point that matters and let the resulting things cascade down. Now, my position from a federal government perspective is the Supreme Court made a wrong decision in creating a right to privacy that doesn't exist and can't exist because it doesn't qualify as a right. Rights are that which confers duties. And so you cannot have a universal right to privacy because they can't universally confer a duty upon other people to leave when you don't want them there. So we have to argue things correctly. We have to be right about things. And when things don't make any sense, we should nix those things. That's my position. So what's my position on abortion then? Am I pro-life or pro-choice? I'm pro-consistency. One way or the other. Let's make a decision. Let's establish the status, and let's have everything else cascade down accordingly. Let's not create bullshit rights that don't exist. If abortion is okay, it's not okay because of a right to privacy. It's for some other reason. And so we need to articulate that reason. So that's my position. People are often dissatisfied with this because they desperately would like me to fit into one of their boxes. Well, you must be meow, right? What's your position on immigration? My position on immigration is the United States should control the borders exactly as they want to the extent that our legal control of the borders is differing from our legal description of our control of the borders, then we ought to patch those holes, however we go about doing that. I would say building a wall along the Mexican border is actually, ridiculous though it sounds, probably a very sensible solution to having more genuine border control. It's the weird sort of dumb idea that I actually go, well, I can't actually come up with anything better than a big wall, But that doesn't mean we necessarily need to build a big wall there. At that point, we have to say, okay, well, where are our policy priorities? How much ought we prioritize controlling the borders? How much is a lack of border control creating problems? And what kind of problems is it creating? What do we do with people who are already here, who are contributing members of society in this way or that, but aren't here legally? Do we have another amnesty like we did in the 80s? Do we try to deport them all? What's the position here? Well, I would say from a political perspective, that is to say, understanding the populace as a whole, that question boils down to we need to account for multiple populations of people's perspectives on this. Some people view these Mexican immigrants as human beings who are disadvantaged populations who need extra care. Those are the most liberal kind of voices on the matter. Some people view them as criminals by virtue of the fact that they came here illegally who should immediately be deported. That's on the most conservative end of the perspective, right? I'm not beating around the bush because the problem is my position is that agenda politics is always beating around the bush. If you want me to advocate a specific thing that the federal government will do, I have a platform which I'm talking about lots of things that the federal government should do and that the Strauss administration will undertake to change in the status quo. But the point is, that's the problem. Politics is not a personal matter, and people need to stop treating it as such. Politics is a public matter. It needs to validate on public criteria accordingly. Your personal opinion about politics is probably worthless. The thing is, there's this common perception that voting is a good thing, right? The reality is most people should not vote. Most people are not informed enough to vote. Most people will vote poorly. Most people will not. We wouldn't want the actual population represented in Congress, in other words. You wouldn't want to just pick random random individuals from the population and say, this is Congress, and expect anything good to happen, right? So I am not trying to avoid any kind of articulating a specific policy, advocacies, or whatever. I'm saying, but the thing is, you need to remember the question you asked. You need to remember the question you asked. So the question you asked was not what I would do, but rather what I thought was wrong with the status quo. So my answer to that question is not, and then you basically critique me for not answering the other question, but that wasn't the question you asked. There's a platform that's not finished that you can look at that articulates some of my various positions on things. I mean, it is not the case that the presidents aren't supposed to hold personal positions. Presidents obviously have personal positions, but the point is they oughtn't be more influenced by we all agree they oughtn't be more influenced by their personal interests than by the public's interests. We all agree on that. Like, I shouldn't spend those tax dollars on buying me a new boat, right? We are all in agreement on that. But where there seems to be a lack of agreement is on the justifications end. I would articulate that, in fact, the justifications should be the same as expenditures, that we oughtn't consider interests so much when factoring justifications for things, because utilitarian calculi, namely, well, if we do this policy, then we'll get this outcome. Those kind of predictive heuristics usually aren't effective for the kind of policy questions that we are actually trying to answer. So it is the case that yes, I may have personal opinions about stuff, and also that I'm capable of saying, as president, I'm functioning as a representative of the public's business and of the federal government and the United States of America, and that requires me to approach things in ways that are different than I would approach my own concerns. That's to be expected. Somebody like Trump has never apparently gone through any sort of thinking about that consideration, nor would he think it particularly meaningful or relevant because of his cognitive function stack. Namely, he makes his decisions according to his own interested calculi, namely his own feelings, not according to calculi that are defensible argumentationally to other people.
Ear.
Cosmic Pentastar asks an interesting question. You think there's going to be violence after the election? No, I don't. I think that there's going to be a vacuum that needs to be filled by somebody with both vision, a nonpartisan capacity to present a third option that's not a moderate centrist, in other words, that doesn't just try to split the baby, because they're never right either, and that can bypass the insistence on viewing things in terms of teams. Currently, people view things in terms of teams. What do I think about position X? Well, whose team supports position X? Oh, the other guy's team? Then I'm opposed to position X. There's way too much of that. I mean, so Legends Fall, I think what you say there really brings up an interesting point of conversation in general. It is certainly true that Trump could make a defense of his positions by simply hiring somebody who's good at defending his positions to write him speeches to read. It's not difficult for him to do that. Even no matter what his type is, he could choose to accomplish things that way. And it is almost certainly true as well that he views the way he does things as the best way to do things. After all, he's the one doing them and making the choice to do them that way. So he would either likely defend that way as the best way to do them, or at the very least say, well, this is just how I do it, right? Now, does that mean that we should say, okay, well, maybe he's not ESFP because he actually could spin these things, but he's strategically choosing not to? The fact that he's strategically choosing not to is itself a frame of reference that tells us how he values, how he expects different kinds of approaches to play out. You know, there's nothing about Trump that would say he's very reluctantly not providing good explanations that he does have access to, but is choosing not to disseminate.
Let's see if there was any response.
Yeah, I understand that's what you're saying, Legends Fall. What I'm saying is the fact that he chooses not to do that is just as indicative of the fact that he can't as the fact that he doesn't, right? The fact that he doesn't is one thing. The fact that he chooses not to is another thing.
You're so good at it.
That I would never choose not to, right? And you have to then argue, okay, well, Trump's not really making his own choices. But I don't think there's any really good evidence for that. Why is it the case that I would never choose not to? As a general rule, anyway. There might be instances where I choose not to, just as there are instances where Trump has chosen to. That's really the question then. So you're not really addressing the argument, you're sort of pushing it back a level. You know, if we could just go back to the days when Trigger was the name of the Lone Ranger's horse, I think we'd all be a happier species.
I think so.
So I want to talk a little bit about Black Mamba. Okay, so at that point, Legends Fall, you're special pleading on facts, not on evidence. I'm not even speculating. You're not even special pleading on speculation. You're special pleading on speculation that speculation might exist. I mean, that's as far removed from justification as you can get. The wife? Who's the wife? Your mom's face?
Ooh, yes, she is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Cold?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
You know how to trigger Tigger?
How?
Critique bouncing.
Oh, God. That would trigger Tigger. See, I double
Yeah. If you run a bouncing critique on Tigger, he will feel personally assaulted.
There should be a meme for that.
That was ice cream horrific. I like ice cream.
Me too.
Thank you, Rachel, for giving me ice cream.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, of course, this is the thing. This is why INFJs in general are wish so much the world was so responsive to like small cues or whatever. Because the other day I mentioned that, you know, the trade-off of INFJ versus ISFJ is that basically with INFJ you just have to get accustomed to the fact that they're not going to hand you food. They're not going to attend to your SI in their capacity, but that you get one or the other and not both. With an ISFJ, you get a lot of attending to your SI, but NI becomes a battleground because your absolutely valued NI is there. Don't tread on me function.
Ooh.
Aid slot. I think that's the best name for it. You know those flags with a snake that say "Don't tread on me"?
Yeah.
that's the flag of the 8th slot function.
Yeah, I do not like it when it's pressed, right? But you did explicitly say that you don't. It doesn't have to be a feast of like quail eggs and like
Right, just handing me,
pickled herring.
making it such that instead of being starving in a little while before we make steaks at like late at 9 o'clock, she's fed me now an ice cream sandwich and an Uncrustable. Took no effort on her part, but it just required her to decide to address that named deficit.
Yeah,
And
would rather.
and I think she's concluded that it's the thing that I'm specifically. Rachel's an INFJ, yeah. Okay, Dolan Narkovsky, yes, it links to personality type. Those 4-letter personality things are a little bit reductive of what it links to specifically. It links originally back to Jungian cognitive functions, which can, in more literal parlance, be described as channels of attention and the implicit frames of reference that accompany one's habitual prioritizations thereof is the most precise way to put it. Which is to say, my dominant function. Well, Dolan Narkovsky, I started there as well. I started with that notion as well, but it's basically a way to model human consciousness in terms of putting information, getting information, receiving information, and interfacing with dynamic systems. And it's predicated on some observations that are pretty indisputable. For example, if I ask you a question that requires you to calculate out an answer, for example, a long deductive reasoning problem, then you'll have to figure it out. And there's an answer you'll get to after you've done that process. That's a deliberation approach to attention. And it's different than the approach to attention you would associate with knowing something. If I ask you, what's the capital city of the United States of America? Then you would probably say Washington, D.C. You wouldn't have to go through and calculate anything. You don't have to look it up in a library in some regard. So we know attention does occur in different ways. In other words, some pieces of information you receive instantaneously due to one form of link or another, and some forms of information you have to attain through a process of deliberation. If I'm going out with 2 boys at the same time and I'm not sure, I have to make a commitment. I don't want to be a 2-timer. I'm just sort of trying them both out right now, and I have to decide which one I like more. Well, I'm using a deliberation function. It's not something I know. I'm confused about it. It's a question that's in doubt. So it's kind of, to say that cognitive functions are pseudoscience is to say that, number one, it's not meaningfully possible to taxonomy the ways that people's affects are similar and dissimilar from one another, which is just objectively and observationally untrue. But it's also saying that we never need to pay any attention to the fact that people pay attention in different ways, and that that in the absence of cognitive functions, the absence of any meaningful model that addresses that question, those things that are observationally so in psychology, would mean that if cognitive functions didn't exist, we'd have to create it to fill in that gap anyway. So another way to look at it is this, and I like that you're asking these interesting questions, because they're the kind of challenging questions I would expect to get from somebody who is a smart person encountering stuff that they have good reason to be skeptical about right out the gate. But because of that, I have a lot of good answers already sort of prepared, I guess you could say. In particular, let me see if I can read this bit of thing here. So the challenge that people face in trying to understand why cognitive functions comprises an acceptable approach is that Einstein articulates in physics two distinct kinds of theories. And I'll read you the highlighted parts here. We can distinguish various kinds of theories. Most of them are constructive. They attempt to build up a picture of the more complex phenomenon out of the materials of a relatively simple formal scheme from which they start out, i.e. to build them up out of the hypothesis. When we say that we have succeeded in understanding a group of natural processes, we invariably mean that a constructive theory has been found which covers the processes in questions. Along with this, there exists a second, which I call principle theories. These employ the analytic, not the synthetic method. The elements which form their basis and starting point are not hypothetically constructed, but empirically discovered ones. Principles that give rise to formulated criteria, which the separate processes or theoretical representations of them have to satisfy. Thus, the science of thermodynamics seeks by analytical means to deduce necessary conditions which separate events have to satisfy from the universally experienced fact that perpetual motion is impossible. The advantages of the principle theory, in contrast, are logical perfection and security of the foundations. The theory of relativity, in contrast to the constructive theory, is of the analytical class. And I think there's one other little section here I want to read. Do I scroll down at any point? Yeah. The search for most elementary laws is to be obtained through pure deduction. No logical path leads to those elementary laws. It is instead just the intuition that rests on an empathic understanding of experience. In this state of methodological uncertainty, one can think that arbitrarily many in themselves equally justified systems of theoretical principles were possible, and this opinion is in principle certainly correct. But the development of physics has shown that of all the conceivable theoretical constructions, a single one has at any given time proved itself unconditionally superior to all others. No one has really gone deeply into the subject will deny that in practice the world of perception determines the theoretical system unambiguously, even though no logical path beyond intuition leads from the principle, from the something, I can't see that part there, from the, what does that say?
The thing is, it's easy to explain the TI. It's difficult to explain the intuition.
Perceptions to the basic principles of the theory. So, in other words, the way that I'm explaining cognitive functions is not pseudoscientific at all. However, it is analytical rather than constructive. That is to say, it's not, to the extent that something is more empirically established, then it's less universally true. So the thing is, here's why I particularly like Jolin's questions, is because they allow me to explain to somebody who's prepared to understand why what I'm doing is different than what things that may look the same are. So algebra isn't an epistemology, it is a utility for solving problems in the real world. Well, what I'm saying is that we should understand functions as equivalent in their nature to functions in math. Let's say processes executed on two or more objects within a field that has a defined grammar, right? We're going to model human consciousness or the manifestation of personality as a manifestation of a cognitive function stack. Then we need to be able to define how they relate to data on different fields. So I've defined 4 specific fields of operation for every human being who is being, namely the external metaphysical field, where I am operating right now, putting information. Prior to the existence of the internet, we didn't really have a clear actual manifestation of the external metaphysical field. It was just kind of libraries, you know. We have the internal metaphysical field where one does one's own ideation inside one's own head. In private, we've got the external physical field, that is, the stuff in the world outside of me, and the internal physical field, namely how I have a stomach ache, for example. this kind of field division, you might say, okay, this is fundamentally what Einstein's talking about. Well, why are there 4 fields? Make the logical leap from the truth that there are 4 fields, 4 distinct fields, to establish that axiom logically. It's not possible. It's observationally so. There are 4 fields because there's not any other place you can consider stuff happening. Now, you could talk about time and say, well, what about time, Eric? Well, the fact is, each of those, the metaphysical fields operate according to turn-based time or conditional realities, namely in which it's presumed that things don't change within a given set of objects on that field until they do. That in the absence of your observing or making change on that field, that no change occurs. Whereas in reality, the world's more dynamic than that, which is why there needs to be an intentional manner that deals with statics and an intentional manner to deal with the dynamic. But is it a complicated thing to explain? Yeah, it's complicated. But to the extent that people have objections to it, I'm confident that my understanding of it and my explanation of things either renders those objections moot or meets the criteria of those objections, or otherwise doesn't fall victim to those objections because I've accounted for that shit or already encountered it. Because I'm doing the whole thing kind of publicly, and because I'm also a debate coach, I'm practiced in making airtight cases. In other words, I know where the vulnerabilities in these things are and why it's easy enough in instances to reduce things as pseudoscience or metaphor or whatever. So I draw distinctions in all those areas. And I say, well, this way of talking about it is metaphorical, and this way is more of a process analysis. When I type people, I use different kinds of questions. It's not so much about what the best way to go is that you'll never have a good way to go if you don't understand the top level frame. So the thing that people take a while to get to understand, and which is why I appreciate, again, these questions, is understandably, people are hesitant to think, maybe he does seem, it's like, this guy's got to be full of shit. He makes a lot of big claims. He sounds smart, but he's probably just making an argument by verbosity. He seems intuitive, and he sort of anticipates my objections and spikes them out in advance. But is that any real reason to believe him? And the answer is, yeah, I genuinely do have the answer. I've thought all of this shit through so much. And the thing is, I would love to speak in terms that are not that don't narrow my audience. So I know that I'm jargony on multiple levels. I'm jargony when it comes to cognitive functions. I can be jargony when it comes to argumentational stuff. I can be just big wordy when it comes to talking in general. I can be jargony with philosophy words and with, political science language. And that can limit the ability of people to really engage with what I'm saying. So that's one of my shortcomings and something I'm trying to work out. But it also runs afoul of what I'm hoping to do with somebody who comes in and asks me good pressing questions about why they should actually think that I'm something other than just another example of the same thing. Because I am. I'm the alternative. There are a million examples of the same thing. And then there's me. And the examples of the same thing may look very different from each other, but they're all fundamentally making the same mistake. They are exercising some sort of agenda that's not a meta agenda. What are cognitive functions? Cognitive function is a term that we use to refer to a channel or manner of attention that can be determined as distinct from another manner of attention, in part by describing whether it knows, deliberates, acts, or interfaces with the dynamic system. Is one way to define it. But the shortest definition is a way of paying attention. For example, we can look at two different ways of paying attention. When we look at three people watching a football game. One of them is a huge fan of the Rams. The other one is a huge fan of the Lions. And the third one doesn't care at all about either team at all. Has no feelings at all about it. So there's this close call in the fourth quarter. The Rams fan goes, that call needs to go in favor of the Rams. The correct call goes in favor of the Rams. The Detroit fan says the correct call goes in favor of Detroit. Close call, tough call maybe. The neutral fan says that call should go in favor of Detroit. Well, the Rams fan and the Detroit fan, they used an interested calculus to decide what the correct call was. They weren't actually saying, based on the objective data, the correct call is in favor of my team. They were saying, the correct call is in favor of my team because that's what I want it to be. That's an introverted feeling kind of way of calculating a determination. The person who didn't have any interest in the matter looked at the objective data, having no preference as to whose side the call favors, said, well, when I look at it objectively, and I just see how his foot was, in fact, out of bounds, so it just goes in favor of Detroit. That's a disinterested calculus. You'll note that the interested calculus in the Detroit fan and the disinterested calculus in the neutral fan both came to the same conclusion, and yet only one of them was an objective calculation. There's a book called Exciting Words and Tables About Human Personality that is a compilation of one-off documents that I made on the subject. I got a lot of different. I'm not very well organized, is what I'm not. I've got a ton of different documents talking about a ton of different stuff related to this sort of thing, and the most single document, organized, bookish kind of thing I have is called Exciting Tables and Words About Human Personality, which I will link to you right now. And I'll put it in the here. The thing is, by and large, my belief is that most people who have an understanding of the world that's equivalent to mine about processes and systems and how things work, and I guess what you call a meta-rationalist perspective, are so means-oriented in their overarching perspective that they're unlikely to want to do something like attain the presidency, or actually think it's plausible or possible. For most philosopher types, they have too weak a link to politics. And while you might call me a philosopher type, my actual profession is making and critiquing public policy, even if it's just for competition debate. It's much more sophisticated work with public policy than actual legislators do, that's for sure. Okay, so Upton Place 48 says, Eric, about the ESFP was able to answer the TI questions. If I'm not mistaken, the one-dimensional functions are functions that develop with experience despite weakness. Okay, first of all, I don't necessarily agree with socionic functionality, dimensionality thing there. So I don't. It may be the case. My position is TI probably does improve with experience, whereas, for example, FI, I'm not sure about whether or not TE improves with experience. Is Rachel's TE getting better? I don't really think so. So I would suspect that it has to do with which kind of function is in the 7th slot as to whether or not you can actually, how much range there will be in it. For example, I don't think there's going to be a lot of range among SI polars regarding their SI. So in other words, SI is a function, interpreted sensing, where the best, the closest skill conversion I can come up with is, in other words, the test that you can give that most clearly gives you data about a person's how a person prioritizes or deprioritizes introverted sensing in their cognitive function stack is to ask them to recount a series of specific and insignificant details from their morning up until now. So when I got up, I first came outside and I was still in waking up mode. I got a call from my client, which I answered and I said, I don't want to talk to you right now. I'm just waking up. And then she called me back later and I came in here and I don't actually remember a series of things I did today because my SI is not that high in my stack and I wasn't really thinking about it much. But the thing is, for SI polar people, they really can't do that at all. For SI dom or second or third people, they typically can do it very well. But it's always going to be until we can get some sort of concrete physical correlate with attending via one channel versus another that we can say consistently when, for example, the concept that a certain area of the brain light up or the brain light up in a certain way when one is using one manner of attention in a different way in which when the brain is using another manner of attention is consistent with cognitive functions, which the engine of which is based on basically locality suppression. It is already established that when one part of the brain lights up, the surrounding parts around it are dimmer than they normally are, so that it's as though it draws energy from surrounding areas. So the whole point of cognitive functions is that when you're paying attention in some ways, you're not paying attention in others. It's logically necessarily so. It's not anything that anybody can really say is pseudoscientific or non-scientific or scientific even. It's just, it simply is the case that that the way that I pay attention when I'm talking all this talk, even though I have all these things to read in the live chat, I'm still talking, is different than the way some people who would read each thing and provide a short answer, and those people would behave that way accordingly, consistently across time. Big Five would describe one person as high extroversion, the other as low extroversion, but would provide no meaningful information about it. Why? What does that mean? It's like it doesn't answer any good questions. So what's the value of it?
What up, Alan Bryan? I felt the same way about the Big Five.
So let me read some things here and see what people are saying. Politics is a seamless web, and any movement within that web is felt by everyone as we are all connected to that web, all with freedom to respond to that movement. Statics is an exercise in equilibrium. Statics is an exercise in equilibrium? I mean, are you saying that everything is a fluid system? It's not the case that everything is a fluid system or a dynamic system. Lots of things are static systems. I mean, there may be subsystems of larger systems that are themselves dynamic, but that doesn't mean that there don't exist static systems. The perfect example is the law. It functions more or less as a static system. I can make my legal arguments over the 2-week recess and come back after that 2-week recess and not discover that I'm dealing with an entirely different set of laws that I need to respond to, for example. That's a system that prioritizes what?
2-0.
We're losing?
Yeah.
What inning is it?
Second.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
We can come back.
Yeah, we can.
There are dynamic systems and there are static systems. I think as soon as we can get something consistent, we will develop proofs for it quickly. I don't know. That's not necessarily the case. If you talk about the example I usually throw out here is plate tectonics. Plate tectonics were dismissed as pseudoscience for 50 years after they were come up with, until finally everyone was like, oh, actually that guy was right. Why? They came up with an empirics test for it. It took them 50 years to come up with one. It's pretty straightforward too. Just look at the fault lines. If they all go in, then expanding Earth is correct. If they go jagged in random directions in different spots, then plate tectonics is correct. That's how they proved it. Are all cognitive functions reducible to a skills test with a threshold that is tuned so as to be easily pass-failed? No, unfortunately, that's not the case. So it is difficult to reduce NI to a skills test, for example, because what NI does is it understands a given thing from a universal perspective. What SI does is it understands a given thing from a personal perspective. Since any given personal perspective is most likely to represent the universal experience of it and least likely to represent the alternative universal experience of it, for most things, SI and NI are going to have equivalent kind of responses to it. So it can be a challenge to distinguish between the two things. However, that example of testing for SI is one of the quirks of SI versus NI that allows you to distinguish between them. There's not an equivalent quirk for NI that I've been able to determine. Do I not believe in evolution? I correctly make the claim that evolution fails to meet its burden to affirm if it asserts, which it does, that it explains where speciation comes from. And I win that argument against any and all comers time and time again. Most people who even attempt to make the argument have no idea what they think they mean when they say they believe in evolution.
Wait, so like, if I have a spirit animal, does that mean that I won't be able to evolve into it?
It means you were born that way.
Aww.
Big Five is pretty scientifically backed as a metric, even more than IQ. Okay, so when you say Big Five is backed as a metric, but what is it doing? If I link, for example, if I give 1 billion people a given test and then establish correlates outside the test with results to that test, fine. But what have I actually established? I've established something that's absolutely so and completely non-universal. In other words, it doesn't universalize at all. It gives us no meaningful explanation about anything. There's no mechanical explanation about why people are this way or that way. There's no linkage between the attributes that says if you're more extroverted, then you're necessarily going to be more agreeable or less agreeable or anything, nor reasons why, if there were a correlation, why that correlation would exist. Additionally, it has a normative element that's contrary to what we know to be the case, which is to say it is not necessarily the case that it's better to be more conscientious. But by using that word and making it an attribute, you, by Big Five, attributes to people some sort of normative failure that they simply are unable to remedy, because after all, personality is that which is defined as those aspects of self that persist the same way throughout life. Additionally, and most importantly, Big Five is a metaphor. People don't have attributes. They express processes across time. The idea that people have an attribute called conscientiousness is a metaphor. It is not a scientific thing to test, right? It's like, hey, we found that if we label things like meow and have test questions that purportedly represent meow, that, wow, sure enough, people score scores on them. It's the art of kicking down open doors. Now, cognitive functions attempts to do something meaningful. It attempts to explain why I'm different than Rachel, and specifically the interaction of attentional manners and the necessarily proportional, inversely proportional, exclusive, and complementary relationships that they go through depending on where they are in relation to each other in terms of habitual and or inherent usage patterns or whatever. That explains things in ways that make sense. You can make predictions and have those and test those predictions. Big Five, not really. Okay, you really can't make predictions, not meaningfully, about anything specific. You can make predictions about general things. Well, in general, people who have lower conscientiousness are less successful at math or something. That's fine. But with cognitive functions, I can give you some very concrete predictions. If, for example, I know that you are an ESFP, I can tell you specifically what kind of arguments are not going to be convincing to you no matter what, and why. I can explain why they're not going to be convincing. I can explain exactly what the person's attentional approach will be in alternative to that. If, in fact, you were to say somebody is a ESTJ, and you were to ask me, and I were to confirm that they're an ESTJ, then you were to ask, okay, well, what's their primary frame of reference? I would say it's utility, it's goal solvency, it's solving problems. So they seem to be at a loss when they don't have a problem in front of them to solve, and they don't get the idea of casual chit chat for its own sake or something like that. And there's a reason for this, and I can explain the reason for this. And when I go and type people, I ask them some kinds of questions that are skills tests, and some kinds of questions that are values evaluations, and some kinds of questions that are self-reporting of attributes, and some kind of questions that ask them what they would seek in certain circumstances, and lots of different kinds of questions. But most importantly, the reason why it's a good idea for me to ask different kinds of questions is I understand how those different kinds of questions represent kinds of questions and what they do in one's analysis. If you haven't done the meta-analysis, you will end up thinking Big Five is meaningful and more scientific. If you're incapable of the meta-analysis or have not yet done it, that's what you will conclude. But any kind of reasonable meta-analysis, which actually says, okay, so what are these things trying to do? Do they do those things? How useful are they? Why are they intellectually robust? Why is something given the status of intellectual robustness and something else not? If you actually do thinking yourself, you realize Big Five's a joke. It's an absolute joke. Why do cognitive functions persist over time? They don't. A person's being expresses via a cognitive function, attentional manners, or pairs of attentional manners. So, like, for example, my being right now comprised first getting information, TI, reading your question, understanding what you meant argumentationally, again, a TI thing, and answering the question by critiquing it, and any TI kind of a thing. I'm coming up with the idea that the alternative to either of the answers that your question presents. The answer is not because they persist over time because meow, or they persist over time because meow. The answer is they don't persist over time. You persist over time and continually express your being via certain attentional approaches or others. What do I think of Jordan Peterson? I mean, I think he's got so many fundamentally wrong frames of reference that he relies on heavily that much of what he says is either flat out wrong, happens to be right, or is fruit from the poisonous tree, which are three different qualities of thing, none of which make me think he's reliable as a person who I ought to think is likely to be correct because of his good reasoning approaches, right? He's not reasoning properly, therefore, he may be reasoning properly, but he's not reasoning within the right frame of reference, therefore, there's no reason to give him much credit or credence to what he's saying until you've heard it and analyzed it yourself anyway. Certainly, he's wrong to impose his TE frame of reference on everybody as a normative good. It is not normatively good to be more goal-oriented and achieve more bullshit, slay more dragons, clean more rooms. Fuck that noise, Jordan Peterson. Stop imposing your own frame of reference on everybody and assuming it universalizes because it's your dominant frame of reference. That's what Big Five encourages. That's the kind of bullshit Big Five encourages. It encourages taking something like consciousness, the inherently normative quality of it, and trying to impose it on everybody, the universal good. So you is separate from the attentional manners that are used to express you, so therefore you can remain the attentional manners used to express can change, right? No, I mean, I think that you is a shorthand term for a stack of attentional manners progressing through time and the four fields as the systems, as dynamic systems change around them and static systems are updated accordingly. I mean, in order to understand a function as something executed upon two things, in math, we don't have to presume an agent, right? In order to see that happen, we don't have to presume an agent. If you're answering a set of problems, 4 times 6, and the next number 3, 7 times 2. If you're answering a set of questions right there, there's no need for you to have any information about who's doing the function on these two numbers for you to correctly see the function executed. And so it's kind of an illusion to think that we have to have a distinct agent executing a function for functions to meaningfully exist. In answering those problems, I guess it's you executing the function, but the representation of the function and its execution exists independently of any agent. Do INFJs have a hard time with FI as children? I don't know, Rachel. What do you think? Do INFJs have a hard time with FI as children?
Yeah.
What do you think that? How do you think that manifests? Like, likely to throw a tantrum at inappropriate points, or more like you don't like it when other people get sad?
Well, like, the times that made me the saddest were when my parents were fighting, and I, like, vividly remember, like, being like, okay, I have to be the stable one because I'm the eldest. So, I would, like, go up into my room and I would cry there. But it was very private. Everything with FI when I grew up was very private. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. It's hard for me to even answer the question like how I related to FI as a kid. I can remember some very FI moments. I remember one time riding home from middle school and being so angry at a bully at middle school and imagining all these like violent things in my head doing towards them, and then all of a sudden being at home like, hey, where did all the time pass? I was so enraged, I guess, that it just all of a sudden I was home. So that's one instance of emotions I remember. Another instance of emotions I remember is when I'm getting really mad at my mom at a restaurant we were eating at and pouring my orange juice into her coffee and getting in trouble for that. Hi, Octavia Silva.
Hi, Octavia Silva. Save photo.
There is absolutely no judgment at all involved in this question, but if I'm feeling inspired to go ahead and edit that thing, unless you're far along in the process, I'll go ahead and do it and get it up, and then maybe move on to the next type police victim, which I guess is named DJ. But if you're far along or about to be done with it, then let me know, and I won't work on it. And if you haven't done anything, I totally get it. Believe me, you're never gonna get any SE judgment from me. I'm not one to SE judge. I'm just way too vulnerable to cast any SE judgments. I don't remember typing DJ, but I probably recognize him when okay, then I'll do it. I probably recognize him when I type him, you know. So just FYI to everybody, just let it be stated here for the record, Rachel Stalker did not show up to talk to me at all, even though he had an offer to come talk to me face to face right now.
Mm-hmm.
He was a coward. So, you know, it's like if he wants to stalk, man up. You know?
Right.
If he's scared to talk to me, how is he going to ever get the balls to talk to girls?
That's facts, too.
Yeah. You know, and so who sent the last email in the exchanges? You or him?
Me.
Okay, good. So we'll just leave it at that.
Yep. With the whereby account. So.
Yeah. He doesn't want to come face the music. Who was the stalker? Some dude that Rachel was friends with like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Who she said, you know, like she may have not been as upfront as she could have been, that she wasn't interested in him, and as soon as she could have been, but when she did finally tell him, then, you know, it was a big fucking deal, and
yeah,
and it's still a big deal 10 years later. I mean, come on. And he's sending her these like hate-filled sort of like, I'm an NI wizard and I'm casting negative spells on you kind of shit, which Rachel's actually slightly susceptible to because she's an NI doll.
I don't like it. I don't like that energy.
Right. And I'm basically dispelling all that bullshit right now.
Yeah.
Because look, for those things, now there's a condition. Your bullshit could theoretically work, but now there's a condition. You'd have to actually come out here and support it and say, yeah, I stand by my bullshit. If you're not going to stand by it, then it's going to stand no chance of winning any kind of metaphysical, magical battle.
Thank you, babe.
So the assumption is that your tendency to do multiplication or addition is consistent is constant since the origin of your choices is instinctual. Well, not so much your tendency to do multiplication or addition, but for example, Rachel looked something up on the internet the other day that required that I tried to figure out in my head. After she looked it up, and I saw what the answer was on the internet, and then we drove away from the drive-through. She mentioned it. So anyway, the types we were looking for is meow and meow. Well, then I proceeded to try to double check it in my head again. In other words, I am instinctually or habitually, whatever you want to call it, going to try to think that my logic should be used to parse out things that require large logic to determine. There are logical arguments that other people's judgment can't be trusted. If I'm an interfacer, that is, say, either FE or TE, I'm much more likely to think, I don't have time to parse out every single logical problem. I'm going to defer to the experts who are most knowledgeable about this. So instead of looking at the meteorology meteorology satellite photos in the clouds and stuff like that and making my own weather forecast, I'm going to look to a weather forecasting professional instead of determining what the best whatever is. I'll look to a professional. So in this instance, they'd say, well, Eric, one of the reasons why I don't trust you and your typology system is you're just a guy, right? Like a TE person might say this. You're just a guy sitting in your room someplace doing armchair philosophy. You don't have adequate credentials. You're not a PhD in philosophy or political science. And you're certainly not, you don't have a doctorate in psychology. What you're saying runs afoul of some of the norms of psychology. And therefore, all my heuristics are screaming, don't buy what this guy's saying. The only reason I would buy what he's saying is if I were to actually think it all through myself and realize he's correct. And I'm not going to bother doing that. So there's nothing wrong with that approach. It's implicit to some people, whereas the other approach is implicit to other people. That's the kind of thing that's an instinctual choice, right? Instinctually, when Rachel has to impact another person in some fashion, she's going to consider the social impacts as well. For example, if she wants to tell somebody that, they look, let's say they get dressed up, they look fantastic, and then they decide to put a big green frog sticker on their forehead. And they say, this is going to really accent the outfit beautifully. And Rachel wants to tell them, that's a poor decision. You should take that frog sticker off. Because she has FE as a tool function, she's going to say something like, are you sure you want that sticker there? She's not going to say, are you effing crazy, right? If a woman chooses to put this frog sticker and asks her boyfriend, what do you think about my frog sticker? If it's a FE polar person, they might go, I think it looks cool, because they might actually think that. If it's an FE countervaluing person who's got it like, say, fourth or sixth or third or something, they might go, I think it's a terrible idea. You look great except for that. You should take that thing off, But if you're FE tool or FE dom, you're going to not only be concerned about whether the FE of the sticker works, in other words, whether or not it looks cool, but also the feelings of the person you're telling the fact that the sticker doesn't look cool to.
Yeah.
FE third means I'm likely to be aware of the fact the sticker's a bad idea, but not care how you feel when I tell you that. So, it's like these are ways that we can distinguish people's relationships with a given cognitive function, why we talk about them in terms of slots. It's how one implicitly is going to value it, given the fact that one implicitly values first and second functions most. Your most dominant function, your most absolute value is your dominant function. Your most powerful instrumental value and your most powerful other function is your tool function. Everything else, your relationship with the other functions, cascades logically from the roles of the first two. And the slots, accordingly, are where they are and the functions are where they are because of the logically necessary cascading quality of cognitive functions. Can an ESFJ's TI ever appear polar? Well, that's the thing. It might test polar in the short term. Like, there are limited amounts of testing you can do on people with bad TI. They don't like it when you make them do a bunch of questions that they get wrong, one right after another, to demonstrate just how terrible they are at this thing. People do not enjoy that process. So it's a challenging thing for me always to answer questions about fourth or seventh slot TI because they don't let me test them on it for very long. what I would say is if you were given the opportunity to really do a full test of everybody's TI and keep the data and gather it all, you would probably find very strong correlations between certain scopes of scores and certain types and certain slots. You'd also probably find something like third and eighth are often equivalent.
Thank you, Diamond.
You said that when 2 and 7 come into conflict, you use 2. What other relationship 1 and 8? So 1 and 8 is more of a one serves the other relationship. In other words, they're not competing to do the same thing. So because your dominant function is the frame through which everything else gets framed, in the 8th slot, the other action function is seen as is what you have to do in order for your dominant function to be running smoothly. It's like, your 8th function is your car maintenance task. You have to fill it up with gas. You got to change the oil. You got to tune the car. All those sort of things. You view your 8th slot function as that kind of stuff, and your dominant function as your car. You don't really care about your 8th slot stuff, but you have to do it. And more or less, you do it on autopilot. You don't think a whole lot about it, and you just think about it mostly when other people step on it, and then you don't like that. When other people critique me for not following through on something, I hate that because I know I'm susceptible to those critiques. And I think that being constrained by my words about what I will do is the worst part about words. So you define TI as attending to prior knowledge of definitions to determine cause and effect relations? No. I define TI as calculating the relative absolute status of a given set of statements. So we can conclude a status about statements. Remember, TI is concerned with the status of statements. It does not presume anything about cause and effect at all. TI is the logic of conditionality, not of causality. Now, when you try to represent causality symbolically, you end up with ordinality, which is similar to conditionality, but different. So Jeff Shaw says, questions can be approached in logic or emotion. For instance, define beauty. Not every question has a correct answer. That is a fair statement. No? Well, define beauty. So it is the case that for every question, there are answers that are more or less correct. And maybe there are a variety of different numbers of answers depending on the question that are more or less correct. So if I say define beauty, and then I read you the definition of beauty from Webster's dictionary, I can say there, I've defined beauty perfectly. If our criterion is the dictionary definition of beauty, right? So there's an implicit criterion question there. If you were to ask me to define beauty in a more meaningful sense, I would say beauty is something that links to the question of aesthetics, and whether or not something has aesthetic grace is these days typically considered a subjective matter. But I am one who claims that in fact it's an objective matter, but not one that's reducible and therefore not one that can be deductively proved. No turtles win races. I am a turtle. Can we then assume that I do not win races? Correct. That's not TI polar. That's correct. If no turtles win races and you are a turtle and you don't win races, that's TI correct. Oh, I asked my mom this question and she refused to think about it and then got it wrong. Oh, I missed that part. Yeah, that's TI polar. That's probably polar TI. Could be 4th slot if you were to. Sometimes they're so atrophied in their 4th slot that they need a little bit of practice.
Octavia Silva, do you know the socionics relationship between ISFP and ESF? Oh, excuse me, J?
So Octavia, yeah, it could be 4th slot. I think about polar is less aware that it's weak in that
That's
area.
shadows.
So it's like polar
Psionics.
like takes them a second to realize you're even talking about TI. Whereas fourth slot is more skittish about it. Oh, you're not gonna go TI on me, are you now? I don't know. So it could be fourth slot.
You know, it's all good.
Are EXFJs prone to over trusting people and giving so many chances even when it's obvious they shouldn't? Probably, yeah.
I'm gonna look it up.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the ESFJ at the donut shop in Arizona who couldn't figure out how much. I was supposed to pay a 10% service charge for takeout in order for the waiters and waitresses to get a tip anyway, which was fine. But she was trying to charge me 110% service charge. So I was trying to explain to her that, no, you're doing the math wrong. And she was very much like, I will not listen to you, and called her and kept trying to execute the thing she learned, and then called her supervisor, and it was like 3 a.m, and got an answer, and then finally came back kind of teary-eyed. Well, they were here for a second, whoever it was, kind of teary-eyed. How would an ESTP female and ENTP male relationship look like? Somebody briefly came into the autonomy room. I don't know who it was. Then they left right away.
Type. ISFJ.
I think that if you read it's a sort of relationship where there'd be an initial fiery kind of meowing, and then
Contrary, that makes sense.
then they just sort of drift apart because of the two FI polars.
So ISFP and ESFJ are contrary relations. So like Octavia Silva might get like really excited over one thing, and the ESFJ is going to be like, "Oh, that's stupid."
If A equals B and B equals C and A equals C, the effect of A equals C, and the conclusion is caused by my pre-existing knowledge that A equals B and B equals C. Maybe my wording is good. Yeah, that's not cause and effect. So, if I say, if all squirrels have wristwatches and all wristwatch wearers have mango trees, then all squirrels have mango trees. It's not caused by the wristwatch. It could simply be that, for example, only humans speak Latin. Jody speaks Latin, therefore she's human. That's a valid argument. Her being human is not caused by her speaking Latin, right? It's not causally related at all. It's the difference between set possession and determination. Those are different things.
Well, is she definitely an ESFJ? Could she be another type?
The thing about causality is people define it in different ways, and philosophers have a lot of trouble with this notion of causality. For example, the strict definition of causality would preclude what you would call over causality. In other words, a strict definition of causality is event X would not have occurred except for antecedent Y. And in that instance, like this lighter would not have fallen to the floor had I not intentionally dropped it. My dropping it caused it to fall to the floor. And that very limited understanding of causality, then things don't have multiple causalities. And you wouldn't say, well, the reason I'm making this video is a confluence of multiple causalities. That in a strict understanding of causality, there are no such things as multiple causalities, or over causalities, as it's sometimes called. For example, philosophers ask the question, well, what do you do if, let's say, I'm about to take 2 Tylenol pills before I go to bed, and Joe and Mary both want to murder me. Now, I put my 2 Tylenol pills down on the table. Independently, without knowing what each other is doing at all, Joe and Mary have come up with the same plan. They're going to sneak over when I put my 2 pills down, because that's my habit every night, and they're going to replace one of my pills with a cyanide pill. They each do that as my back's turned to go fill my cup with water. Neither sees the other one do it, though, as they kind of oddly, and they come from other directions. Okay, so now both my pills are cyanide pills. Each of them has exchanged one of my Tylenol pills. I drink my cyanide pills and I die. Who killed me is the question, right? In that instance, you have a death that has definitely been caused or determined by specific action, but it's not clear which, and it's impossible to determine which one is more responsible because they get swallowed at the same time. It's impossible to say that either of them is not responsible, because even though it's the case that if Jody didn't do her action, I still would have died. It doesn't matter, because if Mary hadn't done her action, I still would have died too. So the traditional causality argument there we see how it starts to break down as a meaningful explanation of things. So what was the cause of my death in that question? If you encounter determinant people who believe in predetermination, like, what are they called? Determinists, I guess. Then you just can point out that problem that they have. It's not reasonable to think that everything can be reduced down into cause and effect. And there are plenty of things that are emergent of complex phenomena. It's not clear exactly how many ants you need to build an anthill. There are a certain number of ants gather in a certain area under certain conditions, and when all those conditions are met, something happens. That's not causality. One of the things about people who bring a TE frame either in the dominant or second slot functions, I think they have a little bit of a harder time. And this is not meant to offend or dismiss anybody. It's certainly plausible that they could, but I think they have a little bit of a harder time understanding their own TE logic as one of a set of possible frames of reference that one can universalize. And they tend to automatically say, well, it's not really possible to think of anything that's not in terms of goals and outcomes or problems and solutions. You're always moving from meow to meow. You've got to know where meow is and meow is, so it's got to be a goal-oriented frame of reference. But no, it is not the case that everything in the world is teleology. Not everything's about purpose or directionality or goals or whatever. A lot of things are done for reasons totally unrelated to that. We can see this as an example in the rational voter fallacy. It assumes that we should increase voter turnout because people vote in their interests, and that would better represent the interests of the mass population. People do not vote in their interests. People are not rational voters. They vote as an expressive act, as part of their expression of their ontology, not as part of their desired political outcomes. How's that for some yammering, huh? Yeah, that's a little something called extroverted intuition.
Yeah, it is.
I'm here all week. So, I guess I'm gonna wrap this one up. Now that we've established that Stocky lacks the courage to come actually say what he has to say to me face to face, or Rachel face to face, actually own his own behavior in front of everybody. I'm happy to own mine. Rachel's happy to own hers. That'll tell you a lot right there. Which party is happy to own their own behavior in front of everybody? That will tell you pretty much everything you need to know about who's right.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for being here, everybody.
So, Freddie Forgiato, one last answer. How does the Tylenol cyanide thing prove anything about causality? What it shows is that it is not the case that you can reduce things simply to complex but fundamentally linear causal chains, which is what determinants do. Determinists do this thing where they go, well, there may be a bunch of different little causes that caused Joe to kill Bob, but it's still causality. Okay, but it's not even clear whether Joe killed Bob. It could be Mary who killed Bob. Well, one way, no, at that point your causality argument breaks down. It's not that way. You see, it's not an increasingly complex bundle, but still fundamentally directional linear causality frame that makes any sense in the world. That's my point. Cosmic Pit Star says, by the way, Eric, you said like a year and a half ago that I shouldn't have gotten back together with my ENFP girlfriend, INFJ, who broke up with me 2 years prior, but I did, and it's been amazing. So, well, and here you go. If you are asking me questions that require a lot of FI, deliberation, or that include some of the wisdoms and knowledges that associate with introverted feelings, you're probably asking the wrong guy. Okay? Because that's not my area of expertise. Introverted feelings. My decision was probably the correct one, assuming neither of you had any feelings, but apparently you both did, so I guess it worked out differently. You know, but I would have been right if both of you had no feelings. So just remember that. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.